Coming to you from the Sacramento headquarters of the California Tow Truck Association, this is the CTTA Interview Series. Learn more about us at ctta.com and don't forget to subscribe.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to another edition of the CTTA Interview Series. Joining us today, we actually have a whole team of lawyers from the Ellison Wilson Advocacy Group. I have Brooks here, I have Kirk, I have Pat. We were expecting one or two of them, and instead we got the whole crew. So we're really happy about it. We just want to talk today a little bit about the Ellison Wilson firm, how they're related to CTTA, a little bit of legislative updates perhaps for you, and some other information. So without further ado, gentlemen, we'll get right into it. So Ellison Wilson Advocacy, it's a full-service governmental relations firm, and you guys represent clients in all three branches of government: legislative, executive, judicial. Tell us a little bit of the history of the firm, kind of how it got started. We'll go from there.
Happy to do that. The firm was started in 1980 by my former partner, Bob Wilson, who was a former senator. He left the California Senate in 1980 and started the firm. And from that, we're one of the oldest firms in continuous existence. I think there's only a couple at the Capitol. A lot of them either gone out of business or they've changed hands and they have new principals. But we go back to 1980, and we have a lot of clients that we've represented since 1980.
Wow. Long history there. So how big is the firm? Who are the key people that work there? I assume that most of them are at this table right here.
Myself, Kirk, and Pat, also Jordan, who's part of the team, and the person that sort of does the books and accounting and all that's my wife, Laura. So that's sort of the whole team. But and we're probably a medium-sized firm for Sacramento. A lot of lobbying firms and law firms that work at the Capitol are not really large. That's just historically been the case. Some of them are growing, but I think we're probably sort of in the middle, guys. Yeah.
Gotcha. So what do you guys like to do when you're not lawyering and doing all that? Pat, do you have any kind of special outside interests at all?
I like to travel. I like to play with my grandson. I have a grandson that's about as old as Kirk's youngest boy, so we have that in common in a way.
Nice.
I have an 8-year-old and a 2-year-old, so I wish I had time for
that's all the time you have.
Nice. Yeah. That takes up more time.
As you can tell, we have almost no hobbies other than some family, which is typical. Very demanding jobs. Spend a lot of time on it, but we like it.
There you go. These guys like their jobs.
Yeah, your hobby and your job. It's nice when they sort of come together if you like what you're doing. So I think that says a lot. We've known a lot of people. Former partner, again, Senator Wilson, he had a lot of hobbies. He painted, he did other things. I think we basically like what we're doing. So
that's awesome.
That's awesome. Doing
it. So how long have you guys been involved, specifically in the towing industry, and then CTTA? But how did you guys get involved with the industry itself?
I think it was 96, and I could be off by a little bit, but I think 1996, the industry sort of reached out to us with an issue, and we formed a relationship, and we've represented you guys in at least one or more capacities since then. I mean, we started off as your legislative advocates or lobbyists, and then evolved into also general counsel, and we've had those roles for most of the time we've represented you.
Gotcha. So, why do you guys think, we all know why you should join the California Tow Truck Association, but from your standpoint, why is it so important to join a trade association, to be in kind of a community of folks?
Well, for most of the members of CTTA, they're small to medium-sized businesses, and they're up to their elbows in just keeping the business running. But there are statewide forces that are coming that can impact the towing business for good or bad.
Right.
And a lot of those policy decisions are made at the Capitol. And so it's important to be at the table to have a role in those decisions. And then there's other aspects of running a business in a state like California where there's lots of regulations that need to be dealt with. Since those things can tend to affect the industry as a whole, it's important to have a unified voice to speak to the policymakers.
Right, makes sense. The more voices in the chorus, the louder it is, the more change can be affected. That makes sense to me. So now I want to kind of get into, for those of our viewers who maybe aren't as familiar with the inner workings of the association, kind of want to get to the meat of what is CTTA. So if you could talk maybe a little bit about the big picture of the association as an organization, sort of how it's governed and managed, and what that association would mean to the members.
Yeah, sure. I mean, just organizationally, it's a 501c3 or 501c6, which is a nonprofit trade association. It's structured in a way in which it's broken out into geographic voting districts, and so it's designed in a way to ensure that each one of those voting districts has a representative on the board of directors. So the board that meets quarterly or so in order to make decisions about how the organization functions. Each one of those geographic districts or the voting districts has a representative that's calling shots on the board as well.
Gotcha.
It's very similar to like your assembly members or senators or congressmen. They all have geographic districts all over the country. And in California, we have our representatives and our senators and assembly members, and so CTTA is no different. It's patterned after that, and so everybody gets their voice in the association. So the association, as Pat says, then has a voice at the Capitol.
Gotcha.
And as the organizing rules for the association are its bylaws, and so we work hand in hand with the board to make sure those bylaws are designed in a way that allows you to effectively and efficiently get your business done, but at the same way do it in a fair way and make sure that everyone's voices are heard and that everything is done up to code and up to what California law states they need to do so as a nonprofit organization.
Gotcha. And then I know, assuming following the sort of political structure that we know, there are committees and other smaller subgroups within the board that are formed to sort of accomplish other tasks. What are some committees maybe that have come up recently to kind of help the association?
Well, the key management committee and the committee that sort of handles the board's work when the board's not in session is the executive committee.
Right.
So you've got the presidents and the vice presidents, the secretary and treasurer. But there are other committees. One of your long-standing committees has been your training and education. Really, it's been the heart and soul of the association to train drivers and owners on the best practices and what to do. And it's got an outstanding program. There's been a number of ad hoc committees at different times. Over the years, committees sort of sometimes you get more if you need something done, and they sort of contract depending upon it. But I think those are probably your three key committees.
And one of the things that's important to remember is CTTA doesn't operate like a private business where the owner comes in and says, I'm going to make a decision today and I'm going to execute it today. And it's
right.
It's designed to be much more deliberative. And sometimes that can be a little frustrating to people that want to make something happen right away. But we think it's a better process to get all the views of the industry as a whole and then make the right decision.
Yeah, it's also one of the biggest challenges, right? If you're to run a towing business, you're a hands-on, seat of the pants. Difficult environment. You're on the side of the road, or you're storing people's cars. You're interacting with different public entities and law enforcement. And you develop a sort of rhythm, sort of the tower, get her done. Right. I don't have a lot of time to talk about it. I'm going to use my experience. We're just going to make decisions. You bring all those people together, and they all are get her done folks. But now they got to get her done as a group.
Right.
They got to sit in the room, and they've got to discuss and debate and sort of figure out and then vote. And those sometimes present interesting challenges. But the board, for quite a few years now, has done just a great job of making that transition.
Right.
And not every association can do that, because people sort of come and they say, well, I want to do it my way. Well,
right.
There's a bunch of my's in the room. And I think the association has done a great job of sort of understanding the difference between how they run their own business and how they have to sort of run the entire industry's business in California.
Right, and do it through one specific kind of format and way.
Yeah.
It's a little bit different. So CTTA, we had a legislative committee, and that would sort of help affect positive change in the industry.
Yeah.
So you've been very active with that committee, but at one point, you guys felt the need that the Towing Regulatory Oversight Council is something that was kind of desperately needed in our industry in California. Talk about the forming of what we call TROC, the Towing Regulatory Oversight Council, kind of how that came about, how it arose, and the results of that so far.
Well, one is I want to give a lot of credit. It never would have happened but for the board. In other words, the board sort of understanding that it was needed, and a lot of people don't remember this, but the board asked us years ago, right before the formation of the TROC, is to go out and find out how the association was perceived in the industry, in the capital, with law enforcement, and to come back and report to the board, because there was a frustration that we weren't getting the same respect that we should. In other words, speaking with that one voice. And so we went out and we talked to legislators and we talked to CHP and different folks, and we got some feedback from that, sort of the things that we could do better, the things that we were doing well, and we took those ideas. We, as a staff, we sort of thought about that. We met with the executive committee, and then took those ideas to the board, and that sort of was where the TROC was born, was to take a, because we were getting feedback that I think, as we talked earlier, we weren't speaking with one voice. People were sort of speaking sometimes too individually. We weren't focusing it. Our structure wasn't as responsive to the different needs of the industry as it should have been. And so we took that into account and did some soul searching and said, we can do better. And so we actually wrote down the rules and the policies and had the board debate them and go over it. So now it's a very structured environment. And we learned that we can't just have big guys in the room or small or only urban. If you look at how we branched out, you've got different interests sitting in the room that have to agree. And before the Ledge Committee was, sometimes it was who was in the room.
Right.
And so 5 people showed up and they happened to be from a different spot. Now we've got rules on quorum, and the super majority takes 3/4 of those folks in the room to sort of agree to it, which is tough when you think about getting that many tours to agree on something. But that means you've got to look at all of the interests of the industry, right? So it was sort of a watershed moment, and give a lot of credit to the president at that time, Sherry White, because one of the rules we have in the TROC is the president can't be part of that, because we didn't want the political influence to sort of overwhelm the decisions that were being made. And she agreed to that, right? And a lot to Terry and Quinn, at the time, they were chairs of individual committees. The one was the legislative committee and the other was the TSAC, or the CHP committee, to combine those into one committee and put it under this TROC umbrella. And they could have said, well, I want to sort of have my committee and not share, right?
Right.
But everybody put those things aside and decided to build a sort of a better way of doing it.
And one of the most significant things of that, especially the 3/4 vote, is now when the TROC comes out with a position on whatever the issue is, it's really persuasive to folks at the Capitol and the CHP, because it really does reflect the strong majority of how the industry feels about the issue.
Right, and spread over various, because I understand, the board of directors, we talked about how it's more regional. You have the regional voting districts, but here we have sort of north and south scheme going, but broken down into small fleet, large fleet,
law enforcement,
all that kind of stuff.
Towing. Yeah, it's all broken out into, it's roughly equally divided between north and south, and you have a slot for each individual different line of business. And so to make sure that the entirety, as Pat was talking about, the entirety of the industry is really encompassing it within the TROC.
Also want to give a shout out to former Commissioner Joe Farrow. So he's now the chief of police at the University of California, Davis, but at the time he was the commissioner
of CHP.
And we sat down, we met with him, and we said, look, we're sort of on this mission to get better. Could you give us some honest feedback? And he did. He gave us very honest feedback for quite a while. I mean, he met with us for over an hour, and we said, if we address some of these issues and work with you, will you participate? And so we went back, and the EC and the board, and then we brought it back, and he hosted at the CHP headquarters the first TROC meeting.
Wow.
And he had his top brass there, and he was there, invited us in. They, and really brought all of his officers in and said, this is important, right? And one of the things that they liked is we were now speaking with one voice. So they could rely on an industry association that had formal procedures that, when, as Pat says, when we have a 3/4 vote and we have, all of these people from different lines of business and different geographic areas and different size companies, that it wasn't just big companies or small companies or north or south.
Right.
We could say, no, they're all in the room.
Right.
And that made their job easier because it was easier for them to interact with industry if they really were going to, in other words, if we could deliver 1,000 members and speak for 1,000 members, it's so much easier than if they had to talk to individually 1,000 members.
Right, piecemeal it all
So
out.
they really like that. So the Commissioner Farrow deserves a great deal of credit because he then, and it continues to this day, the CHP is part of the TROC. They come to every meeting, and not just one person or two people. How many we've had?
Oh,
5 or 6.
countless. We've actually had TROC meetings at the Academy, CHP Academy.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
Wow.
so definitely a great relationship.
Yeah, and top brass have come. I mean, we've had chiefs, assistant chiefs, captains that have come. They bring sort of their subject matter experts. We exchange agendas. They look at what we want to talk about, and then they bring the people that are most experienced to that meeting, so they're not just having somebody who says, well, I don't know, I got to go check.
Right.
They'll bring that person from commercial vehicle or whatever, and then we'll have that conversation.
Right there in the room.
Right there in the
waiting.
room, right.
Yeah.
And likewise, with that, just to build upon that, I mean, we have a similar relationship with other governmental entities. We have DMV, have been there. We have other legislative people, CARB.
Members of the Assembly and Senate Transportation Committees will come.
Right. And we just brought in someone on the committee out of state too, didn't we? From Montana. Representative from
Joanne
Montana.
Blyton.
Joanne Blyton.
Actually, she's the TRAA representative. So,
you go.
expanded to a national presence. And I think she really liked what was going on with the TROC, want to be a part of it and bring some of the national issues to the TROC's attention.
Yeah, and we think it really gave us credibility because it's who sits on your committee is important when you talk about that and being able to bring, as Kirk says, those national issues to bear. And then when we go out and we tell people who's on the committee, because when we bring somebody into the committee, first thing we do is introductions. Everybody around the room talks about the type of business, where they're doing their business. In other words, they're from the Bay Area, LA, or what city, how long they've been in business, why they're there. In other words, they're the auto club person or whatever. If you watch people after those introductions, they're like, wow, I had no idea. And then, so we add Joanna as part of the TRA rep, and they're like, and you even have a national presence. It really is a watershed, sort of change in terms of the credibility that we're projecting.
Yeah. No, that's excellent to have the support of those agencies and like we were talking about, putting it nationally. It's a big step. So with TROC, is there sort of a recent success story that you guys could perhaps talk about in detail a little bit? Some kind of legislative win?
Probably. I mean, I'd like to talk about 1222, but it probably makes sense to talk about the San Francisco litigation to lead into that.
Well, let's back up. Let's talk about Bloom because we do a couple of things, right? We do litigation. The TROC doesn't specifically do litigation. We as general counsel do it for the association, but it oftentimes relates to issues that come out of that, right? So the TROCs become sort of the legal subcommittee, right? Because there's very few issues that the association would be concerned about that aren't really related to sort of the legislation that either is coming or may come or that's impacting them. So why don't we do Bloom first and then talk a little bit about that?
So AB 1222 is a bill introduced by Assemblymember Bloom, Richard Bloom, from down in LA area back in 2015. And essentially the bill did a number of things, but primarily what the bill did that would have had a major negative impact on each towing business in the state was it would have allowed each city in which a towing company or a tow truck drove through, it would allow that individual city or county to regulate the towing business itself.
Just driving through.
So
Require a license or a permit and a fee and inspection. I mean, it could have been any number of regulatory schemes. And a lot of folks in the Bay Area and LA, they go through multiple jurisdictions in a given day.
Yeah. If you thought about the economic consequences of if you said, well, I'm going to be in the Bay Area and I do business you might do business in 12, 13 jurisdictions. Mm-hmm. You could do a lot more than that. And if you had to have a license that could cost you $25,000 a license or more, sometimes less, and have conflicting requirements. Mm-hmm. In other words, if I'm in this jurisdiction, I have to have this on my truck, but when I'm in that, I have to have something different, right? Because there's no coordination. And each jurisdiction just looked at it as if, well, we can just do what we want. We don't have to, cooperate. And Bloom from Santa Monica, he was the mayor of Santa Monica before he elected the assembly, had this sort of very narrow view of what would be best for what he thought his area would need.
Right, right. I mean, and ultimately, after bringing the issue back to the T-Rock and really dissecting it over the course of many meetings, it really got down to, well, trying to figure out what was the root of the problem that he was trying to solve.
Right.
And what was the offensive, towing action taking place in LA that generated this need for, this massive patchwork of local government schemes. And it was really had to do with soliciting at the site of accidents. So tow trucks would show up, and which is already against the law. You can't show up at the scene and solicit unnecessarily. And so we really took a lot of feedback from the T-Rock and took a number of the T-Rock members to go meet with them individually.
Yeah, it was actually really the first time. We had done a little bit in the past, but one of the things that T-Rock was designed to do, there's a tendency to sometimes when people represent clients, the client will just, hey, you just handle it. Right? And you sort of, the client takes a step back and the consultant takes a step forward, and sometimes there's a disconnect. And what we wanted to do is to say, look, it's our job to bring your experience and your knowledge to the forefront of this conversation. So with Bloom, we brought a number of people from the T-Rock to sit around the room and talk with law enforcement and Bloom. And what came out of that was Bloom was sort of understanding that he didn't actually know that much about the towing industry, that law enforcement was beginning to side with us because our arguments were better. The arguments that we were making by the members of the T-Rock had been well thought out. And so we were leveraging that in a way that the association had never done. In other words, taking that experience with our experience, putting it together. And because we felt we would always win, there's nobody that knows more about towing than the towers. Right? So we just had to get that to the forefront. And sometimes, knowledge wins, right? Sometimes it's the political might, and we're trying to combine those two. But we were much more knowledgeable than Bloom's people in that debate. And at the end of the day, we
and one of the things that did help us out in that situation was we activated the whole membership. And that was one of the T-Rock wanted to do was, hey, this is one of those times we need to contact each member of the association and have them contact either their legislator or Bloom himself. Needless to say, Bloom wasn't excited about receiving all those calls. But,
bombarded by
but
faxes.
it was successful in its own way.
But he did call us after that and say, after he calmed down, let's talk. Excellent. Right? And so it was a great resolution. It was really sort of the T-Rock in its... as we were one of the designers, along with a number of other people, but it was sort of what we always thought it could be. Right? It was a perfect example of that. And then one of the strengths that I think that our firm brings in relationship to working with the folks in the CTTA and bringing their experience to the forefront is we also represent the association as its lawyers, right? And unlike most associations, what they do is you're either the lobbyist or the lawyer, and sometimes you talk, but you're not always on the same page, right? And sometimes when you turn over an issue that sort of starts off legislatively, that goes into legal, or starts off legal and goes to legislative, that you lose track of that issue, and it's hard to really work it. But we're all lawyers. We've got a law firm. We represent you. And so we're able to seamlessly take that issue or follow that issue wherever it goes. And that issue that we're talking about with Bloom was also a legal issue with San Francisco, and that's what Pat's going to talk a little bit about now.
Yeah, so a few years ago, the city of San Francisco started implementing and really enforcing their own citywide permit scheme. So if you wanted to tow in the city, you had to have a permit, and that doesn't sound so bad, except that our members in the Bay Area were finding out that annually, because there was a fee per truck and per driver. Okay. So the average firm was having to pay $10,000, $15,000 a year just to do business. And that's not if you're in San Francisco. That's if maybe you're in Oakland and you go into San Francisco periodically. Right. So it was a big issue. We instituted a lawsuit basically arguing that under existing provisions of law, the city couldn't reach out from beyond its borders and regulate people that don't even reside or have their principal place of business in the city. That lawsuit ended up going state court, federal court. We bounced around. It took a number of years, but we finally got a successful ruling that said, no, if your towing business is not principally located in San Francisco can't regulate you. So we ended up saving members a lot of money.
That's awesome. Yeah, makes logical sense.
Yeah, and what happens a lot is, particularly in litigation, is the city of San Francisco thought that they could just sort of out-resource us. Right, the association doesn't have the same amount of resources as San Francisco. They would just keep pushing the litigation, and the association would be bankrupt and wouldn't be able to defend itself because, as Pat says, they split the case. They were going in two tracks, into state court and into federal court, which meant normally you could have your legal fees would go way up, and then you'd run out of money, and then they would just sort of win by default. And working with the association, we were able to not have that happen because it's sort of part of our retainer. And so we hung with them all the way through, even though they kept like, wow, you're still here. We went all the way up to the Ninth Circuit, Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. So it was a huge fight, but then to take it back to Bloom, what San Francisco was trying to do locally, Bloom then, when they lost in court, then they went back into the legislature, right? Not just San Francisco, but then, Bloom, who's from LA, thought, oh, I'll just change the law, right? And so had we only been the attorney or only been the lobbyist, we wouldn't have been able to sort of handle both those issues. But we sort of came back, pivoted, and said, okay, we got to block it here. So there's most of what we do for the association is what I call sort of barbarians coming over the walls. You're trying to defend a lot of folks, well-meaning. Assemblymember Bloom was well-meaning. He thought he understood towing, that it was pretty simple. Well, talk to any tower. Towing is anything but simple. Yeah. Very difficult, very complex.
Yeah. Awesome. So, moving on from some of the T-Rock's works and going back to what we were talking about, the many voices joined together, more powerful. So, tell us a little bit about kind of lobbying, what you guys do, and what that means to the industry. Just specifically...
No one really knows. No one really knows.
Well, I mean, just a real broad overview. I mean, California legislature, 120 members all throughout the state. Each year they introduce about anywhere from 2,500 to 3,000 bills. And so one of our primary jobs is to dig through all those bills, and keep in mind each one of those bills is amended 6 to 8 times throughout the course of the year.
And it's not like you're getting a little email alert when these things. You guys have to dig through constantly.
Yeah, ton of reading. And so, obviously any of those amendments can be minor changes, including a comma, which sometimes drastically changes the nature of the law. And sometimes it's totally wholesale changes where it's a completely different bill, and so we need to read that one anew. We dig through those and then bring those bills that have a potential impact on the towing industry or small businesses or anything like that. Bring those to the T-Rock to really dig into and chew on, and then take that feedback and obviously during the course of the discussion with the T-Rock, give feedback to them as to what we see, some of the political pressures and some of the players that are going on,
right.
Some of the opposition support, that type of thing. And then, take that feedback that we receive from the T-Rock back to the legislature.
And the legislative process is designed to, from the time a bill is introduced, it's kind of expected that all of the special interests that bill might impact are going to come to the Capitol and say, no, we like this part, we don't like that part, change this, change that. And so part of what we do once we get the feedback from CTTA and T-Rock is now we then have to wade in to that kind of circus of arguments of why this bill is good, bad, or needs to be changed, and try and influence the legislation as best we can to either minimize the negative impacts or maximize the benefits.
Yeah, it's a big education process, and there's a lot of misinformation. We were at the Capitol one day, and we weren't even scheduled to testify, and one of the witnesses went up and was talking about how towers that tow for law enforcement can charge anything they want. And we went up and said, we sort of cleared up the record and said, no, that's inaccurate. Went through the process and all that, and members of the Assembly Trans Committee went, wow. But everybody thought, well, and we talked to the person who did the testimony, he goes, well, I always thought that's the way it worked. Instead of that, so a lot of what we do is education. Sometimes it's sort of in the heat of the battle education. Sometimes it's as the bill comes out, where you go to a member and you say, what are you trying to do here? Because if we understand what you're trying to do, we'll actually work with you if it makes sense. But I don't. You're not getting there the right way. You're causing some unnecessary problems, expenses, and then we'll sit down. And a big part of lobbying is that education process. Sometimes they know exactly what they're doing. The bullseye's on you, and they want to get at you, and then it's just a fight, right? And then you're just sort of marshaling your resources and just trying to, count votes and all that. But so it's sort of that whole gamut.
Gotcha. Well, thank goodness you guys are there. That's all I can say. So let's talk a little bit about the kind of financial portion of this. And we do have a PAC Fund, Political Action Committee. I want you guys to talk a little bit about our PAC Fund, what that is, and why it's so important to have what is essentially a war chest.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think it's first off initially important to say, hey, it's illegal to pay for votes. So obviously any money that's spent out of the CTTA PAC doesn't go to pay for a specific vote on any particular bill, anything like that.
That's probably the biggest misconception
Right.
by lay people who read the paper and watch TV. They'll say, "Oh, all that money in politics, you're just giving money to your elected officials so that they'll do what you want." And and we will spend a lot of time with clients and say, "No, one, that's illegal, and it doesn't work that way, right?" The same way that who do you vote for? You vote for them for different reasons. Would you vote? Why do you vote for them? Why would you walk precincts for them? Why would you tell your neighbors to vote for them?
Or put a sign in your yard.
Put a sign in your yard. It's because there's something about that candidate that you believe in. You believe that they're going to be good for small business, or they're going to be good for any number of things that you believe are important,
Right.
and that they have credibility, and you have confidence in them, right? And maybe some of it is just they're going to listen to you at a critical time because they're busy schedules, and they're going to sit there and say, "Look, come into my office and let me understand your issue." That's really what this does, right?
Yeah, sure. And you're building allies for when they're having their closed door meetings. And we want to have someone that's already knowledgeable about the towing industry there, who's able to speak to our issues and be able to educate some of their fellow legislators
Absolutely.
as well.
Yeah.
And the reality is, you can't separate money from politics, and it is inordinately expensive to run a race for the Assembly or the Senate, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars. And so you have thousands of interest groups contributing to candidates, and we just want to make sure CTTA have a seat at that table and is
Right.
part of that.
Have no choice but to join the fray.
Right. Yeah. And business people understand it. I mean, you there's a lot of things that you have to do to support. You join the association, you contribute your time. I mean, this is an association that's mostly volunteers. I mean, if you think of the board and the EC and people that will come testify and come to the T-Rock meeting, people are using their own money, their own time, and they volunteer. So that it's important to sort of not only to do those things, to recognize them, but people also will put their money down, right? And almost every association, I'm not familiar with any association that doesn't have a PAC and doesn't sort of take money out and build that war chest and try to support candidates that are going to be good for their issues, that understand them and appreciate what they do. And towing is a difficult business because everybody needs it. I mean, in other words, if you think about it, your wife or your daughter or somebody that you love, a family member, is broken down on the side of the highway. I mean, that is an extraordinarily difficult and important job. If you're a business owner and you want customers to park in your lot, but you've got people that are blocking that or taking up those spaces illegally, you need that service, right?
Right.
But so it's one of those things that's absolutely necessary, but not everybody sort of understands that.
Or appreciates it.
Appreciates it. And so part of that PAC, again, is an education where you have the ability to sort of get that attention and bring people. And we've had members come in and talk to. I remember we had the chair of the Assembly Appropriations Committee, and he came in to an event, and people were talking about the cost of their trucks. And he said, "I had no idea. You mean you guys are spending like $150,000, $250,000, $500,000 or more?" And they all, towers had pictures of their trucks, like picture of your kids, and they would go, "How much is that? How much is that?" "Well, that's like a mortgage to a house." And somebody would say, "Yeah, I got like 10 of them."
Yeah, and car was making me replace all of them.
Right. And so a little light went on, and he goes, "Now I understand when we do something, why you guys scream so much. We need to do a better job talking to you about the impacts." And it was a little light went on, and all the towers were just in a circle, having their day, and they all went, "Wow, this is really helpful."
Wow. Yeah.
Right? We were able to sort of, because we weren't talking about legislation. We were just, because it was a fundraising event, we were just talking about sort of the questions you're asking us. What's your day like? What does it mean to run a towing business? What are the risks? How much does a truck cost? And he goes, "How much does a truck?" Because he's thinking, a tow truck is one tow truck.
Right.
You know, you see it's a classic tow truck. It can't be any more, what, 35,000?
You don't need attachments.
You don't need anything.
Any light
And of
bars.
course, ask a tower that, and you're going to get an earful. So for the next hour, and very respectful, but gave him everything from a rotator to a flatbed, etc., and all of the add-on equipment and what you buy it for, and then the training and the labor costs and the fuel cost, and it was like
Insurance,
yeah.
Oh,
Everybody's just picking their jaws off the table.
yeah,
and
and it's like, my God. So now it's an environment when something comes in, they're like, oh, I need to go talk to this industry to find out what the impacts. Now they still may, introduce the bill or want to do something, but at least they're going to think and they're going to have a conversation about maybe trying to change that a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. So it really does sound like a huge majority of what you guys do is educating folks about the industry,
definitely.
about what our members are doing and what they're going through. And,
Right.
and so that's awesome. And we love having you. And, you guys, if you want, we have a website. You can donate to the PAC Fund directly. There's a special form on there to fill out. But you'll want to go to ctta.com/PAC. Check that out. If you want to, we also have other special interest funds, things that aren't as politically related. We have a driver's relief fund, and that money goes towards, drivers who are killed in the line of duty. We cut them a check for their family to take care of them and just sort of ease that situation a little bit. And there are a number of other things we can donate to, but definitely check out the PAC Fund. It's worth looking into if you're in the industry and you want to try and, just help affect a little change and keep the industry running very well. So I think that's it from me, gentlemen. Any parting words you have for the membership that you'd like to say?
Well, we want to say thank you. We appreciate having this opportunity, and we also want to say thanks to the board and the EC. This is it's really an honor to represent the association, and we mean that with all sincerity. It is an extraordinarily complex business. You think of the financial issues, the labor issues, the political issues. I mean, a tower is having to deal with such a complex. Work with the CHP on an agreement that's about an inch thick now. Yeah. All the requirements, all of the testing, having their trucks inspected, interfacing with law enforcement in cities on contracts, having a labor pool, right, that's very challenging. All of the laws on drug testing and everything that go through. If you could check off all the boxes, we've not experienced, and we have a lot of different clients, different associations. We don't have any client that is as complex and difficult as this client is in terms of to run a business, a successful business. It's very difficult. So we feel good representing you. It makes us feel good because you guys appreciate it and we appreciate you, and so that's a great combination.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting work too. There's so many different issues that keeps us engaged, and obviously meeting everyone is just great. We have personal contacts with everyone in the
Towers are good
industry.
Folks.
They are.
Yep, absolutely. Well, guys, thanks again. I do have some stuff for you. We got some CTTA swag. We probably have dozens of these. I'm not sure from over the years.
I love it.
And then we, of course, have our brand new Slow Down, Move Over bumper stickers as well. Big concern in our industry. So thanks again for coming in, guys. We really appreciate it. I guess we'll see you probably at the next T-Rock meeting. I think is going to be in this building. So
in this building.
So we'll see you back here, guys.
Cool. Hey, appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone, for watching. We'll see you next time. Have a good one.